Okay. I've never had that before.
It's a new thing, yeah.
I suppose it's a privacy thing, and it's a nice little opening to today's chat. So, both of us got a bit shocked then by the new announcement about the recording. But thank you so much, Grace, for joining me today. This is something new for the book club, and I love the fact that you're the first person. I was thinking the other day, who else am I going to reach out to going forward? But obviously, we've known each other now for, it's probably 9 years. Yeah, I was trying to work it out the other day. Been very, very lucky to know you personally and professionally. And obviously today we're talking about your third book, Struggle, by Grace Marshall. So do a little bit of an introduction, really. I've always known you as a productivity ninja. And what I love about that is sort of the gentle, almost sort of organic way that you look at productivity. Quite often when, especially in the coaching world, which we both spend a lot of time in, we talk about productivity, it's all about tasks and apps and things like that, but you take such a different approach to it. So what was your the catalyst, I suppose, to write Struggle? Because I felt like it's very different to the other two books that you've done.
Yeah, definitely. So it was different because I think it was almost like a topic that was on the periphery of productivity. So it was this thing that kept cropping up in conversations that started off about productivity, and then it kind of went to, but I'm really struggling with this, and what I realized was that the answer wasn't, here's another productivity tactic to help with that. The answer was more, let's just try and help me understand that, what's going on there. And sometimes I discovered that actually, it was like, I'm struggling because something's gone wrong. Sometimes it was, I'm struggling because I feel like I've got something wrong, I've made a mistake, or I feel like I've failed. But sometimes equally, it would be, I'm struggling, but nothing's actually wrong. But I think that something's wrong because I'm struggling. And so it's a really kind of weird topic that I thought, hang on a minute, this is a part of the work-life experience and the life experience that we're not talking about here. And so it then became a bit of an exploration that I wanted to kind of dive into and unpack and open up, which is why it was very different from the other books, because the other books was like, here's what I already know, and I can share that to help people. Whereas this was more like an idea that refused to leave me alone, that I wanted to kind of explore and open up.
Did you feel like it was almost quite self-reflective for yourself then, in terms of, your own experiences around struggle and the attachment to what that means, as well as the work you have with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. And it was also something that I wrote very much from that fellow explorer point of view, rather than I'm the expert, because I'm definitely not the expert.
I think it's so interesting when you talk about the sort of the emotion and the attachments around struggle. When I talk about work-life balance with the work that I do, one of the things I talk about is sort of quite a big revelation that I had when I moved out of a really high-performing corporate setting into doing my own work, and was this association between hard work equals good work. And actually, especially I think when you go into self-employment or you shift into a role that sort of suits you in a different way, things don't feel hard, and there's so much around, hard work equals innovation, and you get all these stories that are out there that I lived off £1 a week for 30 years, and then all these types of things. And I felt it was quite philosophical at times, I felt. How much has the last year, the pandemic experience, sort of changed your thoughts around productivity when we are so restricted around what we can do?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating the last year, in terms of people have been, I think it's given us the opportunity to pay attention a lot more to, like, how do I work? I think it's forced us to redefine, what does productivity look like? What does good work look like? Particularly for people who've been used to working in offices, where you get used to the visual signals of like, oh, that person looks really busy. They're like furiously typing. They're like on the phone all the time. There's a queue of people coming up to the desk. They must be really productive. And like, without that, you then, I noticed there was a bit of an existential crisis for some people. Go, how do I show that I'm working? If my boss can't see me being really busy. And what that led to was actually, what is a measure of productivity anyway? Do I just replace that sense of visibility with like, I'm just going to write lots of emails and send lots of messages so that people know that I'm definitely not watching Jeremy Kyle. Or is it an opportunity to suddenly go, hang on, like, what am I here to do? And if the success or the result of productivity that I'm aiming for is to produce, like, is to innovate, or is to come up with new ideas, or to deliver something really good, or anything that requires quality attention, then actually maybe being less visible and being less busy actually could lead me to be more productive.
I think there's so much out there around, especially again in the space that I work in, where it's about outputs, it's not about presenteeism. And this sort of pandemic has forced an awful lot of organisations that for years have said it's not possible to have that whole idea and sort of refocus. And I found it myself, sort of running the business. All of a sudden my time wasn't my own. I got both, like yourself, got the kids at home, varying degrees in terms of supervising that they'd need, for homework. And actually it made me rethink, the time that I had available, and sometimes it was an hour a day. Sometimes the only thing I could do was coach one client. Sometimes I only had an hour a day, and that was to write a blog or, to catch up on my emails or whatever. And it does make you rethink actually what's the point. And I've personally dropped some activities, or reprofiled what good enough looks like. And as you know, that my standards aren't that high, so I'm quite bounded with stuff like that. But again, thinking about, well, actually, what's the point of doing this? And little things like, I've started rehashing a lot of my social media posts, where before I'd feel like every single one had to be brand new and brand, unique. And even after being told that by a social media strategist, I still held on to that need of, and this assumption that everybody that I know is reading everything. So again, thinking about what's the end goal, what does good enough look like? And actually, am I getting any value from it? And that sort of, for me, that there's several things. So I'm going to be writing sort of my official blog, will come out on Thursday, but one thing really stood out to me, which I almost feel like was sort of sign of the times, was this whole part around that efficiency is deficiency. And obviously how that's had an impact. You use a great sort of examples around sort of bread and flour and things, but I thought that is just a perfect example of how so many people work personally and professionally, that we're aiming to streamline all the time, and to shorten or to reduce or to make things cheaper, but actually aren't always providing quality. The side, I'd love to delve into that a little bit more with you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a funny one, isn't it? Because absolutely, we think that if we can certainly just make everything efficient, like there's no waste, there's no dead time, it all feels really productive, because then it's like it's really measurable. And but actually what gets squeezed out quite often is it's the creativity, because our most creative times don't tend to come when we're super efficient, because efficiency is just about doing the same things over again. It's following a very familiar route and a well-worn path, whereas creativity often is about deviating from that path. It's about divergent thinking. It's about looking for the periphery where the ideas come from and making those kind of connections. That's where innovation comes from. And so if you streamline everything, you can squeeze out the innovation. If you streamline everything, you also squeeze out the similarly the discoveries. So I heard the other day, actually, and I wish I'd known this before I wrote the book, because I was looking for an example. In the book I give a few examples of different innovations that came out of mistakes or like accidents, and the one that I heard the other day was Cadbury Flake. So the weird thing about Cadbury's Flake is if you put it in, if you put it in the microwave, it doesn't melt. Yeah, it's a really weird chocolate. And basically they discovered it. The story goes that they discovered it from some of the waste chocolate that had kind of seized and
fold it.
Yeah, that's it. So it's a particular process that had happened to it. And they, somebody spotted that and decided to give it some attention, and then came up with Flake, which nobody else has managed to replicate.
And I did see on LinkedIn today, apparently there's a worldwide shortage of flakes. Who knew? So if you could get your hands on it, really get it. But again, that shows, doesn't it, quite often you know, we think we have to, and I, you know, I joke that I have like low standards. I have a perfectionist nature with this combination of low standards. It's quite a mixed bag, really. But again, you know, you have this idea about what good enough looks like, and I think a lot of us, you know, if we equate it to parenting or starting a business or a new job, we feel like if we don't get it right the first time, there's a problem. Rather than it's, you know, it's a learning process. And I think having those little examples, you know, quite often we hear about the post-it note example and things like that, but having those examples to hand and being open to just try things, I think can make such a, you know, massive difference to people. So as you know, I work a lot with parents, and a big theme for all of us over the last 14-15 months has been overwhelm. You know, too much to do, not enough time, you know, expectations, standards, those types of things. You know, overwhelm happens regularly anyway, even if we disregard what's happened sort of personally and sort of globally over the last year. So what advice would you give sort of with your you know, personal and professional around productivity and struggle, you know, what you've learned from struggle? What would you give to parents who are feeling quite overwhelmed at the moment?
So when we're in overwhelm, our brain tends to be in fight or flight. And when we're in fight or flight, our options are actually really limited, because, you know, one of the aspects of fight and flight is that it gives you tunnel vision. Because if you are being chased by a bear, you don't want to look and see how beautiful that rainbow looks, right? You don't want to be distracted by that. You just want to go, right, either is there a weak spot in my opponent, or where's the escape route? So that's where your mind goes to. And I think that's one of the problems with overwhelm, is that there's so much going on and our brain is trying to just home in on one thing, and it can't, because it's like, but is it this or is it that? Should I do it? And so we end up feeling really scattered, and that's why we struggle with it. So one of the things I explore in struggle is how to recognize that fight and flight, recognize what it's doing, but then also how to come out of that cycle. So, you know, one of the things I talk about, actually, I forgot to ask you, am I allowed to swear in this? Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things I talk about in the book is, I call it the 3 shits. And so the first is, oh shit. It's like just recognizing, like, oh shit, this is hard, or this is, you know, this is painful, or this hurts, or you know, this is inconvenient, or, you know, whatever. Like, just, you know, just allow yourself to feel it. Because if we don't, then we're constantly trying not to pay attention to it, and that's still going to take up our energy. And then the second is, what is this shit? It's like, what's actually going on here? And that's where we can start to activate curiosity in the face of fear. And curiosity is like an antidote to fear. It kind of takes us out of, you know, bear mode and into, oh, rainbow, or like, oh, that's not a bear, or no, he's not after me. You know, so it helps us to see differently, and quite often that's when we can start to create some options. And so in terms of, like, in the pandemic, when we were juggling homeschooling and work and stuff, sometimes that might be, do you know what, like, this email right now doesn't matter. And it might be, I'm in such a fight or flight mode that I am treating every email that lands in my inbox as a bear. And I'm reacting to everything as if it's a fire. So fear is telling me these are all threats, but actually curiosity is saying something different. So it's when we can start to see things for what they are, but also see things for what they're not. And then we can start to go, okay, you know, yes, it's still tricky, it's still hard, there's still the struggle. This is what it means, this is what it doesn't mean. And then the third stage is what I call holy shit. So it's like the revelation that comes from that. And, you know, sometimes holy shit is like, holy shit, it really doesn't matter if they don't finish all that homework. Like, just the fact that we're getting through each day, or just the fact that there's a, oh, that's interesting moment that comes from, you know, like, that is good enough. And not even just good enough, that is good. You know, I've had so many parenting moments where I've gone, I'm really struggling with this thing because I feel like I need to get it right. And then, you know, the recognition that, like, no, this is what parenting looks like. You know, just that recognition has been a holy shit moment for me.
Definitely. I think, I think the biggest thing that I ever learned that I apply to most areas of my life now. So when I was in my previous role, newly promoted into a project manager role, my manager at the time telling me, as a project manager, you don't need to do it all, you need to just make sure it's done. And actually, I think that was sort of a big revelation, because again, it's the version of done can vary quite often. And I think, I love that whole idea, and I've been there myself, we've talked about it sort of before. Just because I do what I do doesn't mean that I've got everything sorted. I think we're quite similar in the sense that we have sort of an inbuilt drive to to have a balanced life. So a lot of the things that we're driven to, it's because we work through those things ourselves, rather than like, oh yes, everything's absolutely sorted. And again, you recognize that when you're trying to do things that actually it's not your responsibility to do, or like you say, actually it's good. And I think that's a big thing for me. And sort of when we think about overwhelm when it comes to parenting and families, it's remembering that you're never going to get it right all the time, and good enough is actually good enough. And actually, sort of the one thing that I hone in a lot with mine is actually, would sort of that self-talk I'm giving myself, would I want my girls to talk to themselves in that same way, or would I want them to, whatever the way that their life takes them as they go forward, to feel that type of pressure? And I think again, it's that curiosity, isn't it? If I was hearing, if a client was saying this to themselves, or a friend was saying this to themselves, or putting these expectations on themselves, what would you say? And if you're going to sort of encourage them to think differently, you should start with yourself. So what are you reading at the moment? Do you have any time with everything that you've got going on? What are you reading at the moment?
Oh, what am I reading at the moment? So I have just finished. I normally don't mix my books. I normally read one and then move on to that. But I did have two going recently. So one was Burnt Out by Selena Barker.
Yeah, I've got a different Burnt Out, but yes, I'll have to put that one on my list.
Have you got Burnout, Emily and Amelia Nagoski?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that one too. So
yes.
Absolutely adored that one. And actually, I read that one after I'd finished writing Struggle, but there's so much they talk about the stress cycle that really applies so well to Struggle. So Burnt Out by Selena Barker is more a more kind of a go-to guide. So it's kind of, it talks a bit about like why we're in this place and what's caused it, but then it's really super practical. So it's the sort of thing that if you are feeling burnt out, you could pick up and find something really practical to put to use. So and it's beautiful. It's like really colourful and stuff. So
lovely.
Yeah. And then I've also been reading How to Fight Racism.
Okay.
By Jamar Tisby, who I've had the pleasure of working with as a client. And so he wrote, his first book was called The Colour of Compromise, and it was about the complicity, well, basically the relationship of racism and the Christianity in America, and like the history of that. And so How to Fight Racism is his like kind of practical, so what do we do about that, answer to that. So I just finished those two. And now I'm reading a book called This Is That, which is a faith book. It's a Christian book written by my pastor, who I have been nagging for years to write his book, and he's finally done it. So so I'm reading that. So quite an eclectic mix. So
you were beta reader, or are you sort of one of the first editions of that?
So I've got the first edition. I'm not a beta reader, but so it is out now. That's a
good mix. I think that's the thing, it's about staying curious as well about everything. I've just finished reading Demystifying the Female Brain, and it's written by a neuroscientist, and it's basically the female brain from conception right up to old age. It's been an interesting read. Sort of, you have little sort of patriarchal medicine and things in there as well, but again, it's sort of this whole idea of nurture nature, personalities, hormones, all those types of things. So that's so I've just finished that, and I've just started Slug and Other Things I Was Taught to Hate by Holly McNish, which is amazing, absolutely amazing. It's a combination of poetry and prose and essays and things. So I'm a bit like you, I try and mix it up really. If I can read something that makes me think differently about myself or other people, I like that.
Exactly.
So before we finish then, where can people find you if they want to find more about your books or more about what you do?
So I'm at gracemarshall.com, and you can find out more about Struggle at strugglethebook.com.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm just going to stop recording now, and we'll talk privately once it finishes. Thank you ever so much.